what are some unique things that Siemens might be doing or Corning might be doing or some you're aware of in terms of justifying the large investments required to enter a market or to create partnerships? Are the payoffs immediate or does it actually is it actually a long-term game?
You want to talk?
Maybe I can say a few
Yeah.
words about that. So um, maybe because we're a little bit younger than Siemens, but we're still quite old. We invest in regions for the long term. So our R&D center in Europe is now 62 years old. And so we decided 62 years old to have R&D centers there. In Asia, we started in China in the 80s. So this is a long-term game. You want to be in a region, you want to understand, you want to be seen as a local producer. We have 22 plants in China now. And so it didn't happen like in the last few years. It happened like over time because you need to have the employees, you have to have like the well-educated students that we want to hire. So we also want them to come and work for us. And that's the same in Europe and elsewhere. So it's a long-term investment, and I would never discount the people aspect. You want to have the best engineers. You want to have the best talents in a region. And so it takes time for your brand, your equity to be recognized in a region as well. So long-term investment, people investment, asset investment, but it takes a long-time strategy. Sometimes your investors might not understand that, but you need to be able to articulate it. Because there's going to be like fluctuation in the markets, but you want to tell them, this is my direction. I'm going to get there for a long run. Difficult conversation we might have.
Kelly, for you, is long-term a
Yeah.
necessary part of it that you just can't achieve return in the short run and therefore you must look at long-term and there is no other alternative? Is that right?
Yeah. You must look at long term. I mean, we're in 180 countries now with direct presence in 70 countries. And how that's benefited us with the recent uncertainties is that we're able to flex what we do and who we employ in different countries. So, we're able to come to the US government and say, hey, we're not just a European country. We have our greatest size workforce is actually based in the US, and 2 of our 5 business segments are headquartered in the US. And that's been beneficial for us on that side. And then with direct presence and direct manufacturing in many other countries, it also helps us out on the other side. So we can flex back and forth for the uncertainties that may come today and tomorrow.
Rustam, let me turn this to you that from what you have seen with strategic alliances, how long-term?
Well, it really kind of comes down to the industry you're in. I'll give you an example, right? If you're in the semiconductor industry and you're going to put down $10 billion to build a fab in Arizona, developing people is a no-brainer because it risk mitigates your asset, right? It's going to take you 20, 30 years to amortize that asset anyway. So you are by definition in it for the long term. And you're going to develop people and you're going to develop them over and over and over again. You're going to try your best to retain them. If you're in a different industry where the capital requirements aren't that high, your horizon tends to be not as long. And so your investment in people doesn't necessarily have to be as deep and as long term, and perhaps a little shorter. Also, it brings it to the possibility of doing things in partnership with others, especially if your IP is easily controlled and fence-lined. Often companies turn to joint venture agreements with companies in local markets that help them with people development and hiring and development and so on and so forth. That happens quite a lot.
Let's turn to public partnerships. And Ed, you've done a lot of work in this area in emerging markets, and currently you're doing work in Ukraine. What opportunities do you see in the world today with regard to public partnerships?
So much of my lens, due to Corning, thank you, is viewed from the New York City perspective. And it's a very unique perspective.
It's a good joke for the afternoon, by the way.
It's a very unique perspective because as one of the top economies in the world, and given that we're a city, we can do so many things with a city like New York that very few cities in the world can do. speaking about flexing muscle, the ability to convene bilaterals here in New York City because of the United Nations, because of typically we've had the largest diplomatic community in the world for decades at this point. Um, the ability to put all these pieces together is just so much easier in a place like New York, and the exchange of best practices gives us that ability to learn from others and then export what we do well here. We get this unique perspective that winds up um, bringing us out to places around the globe where we normally don't go. And one of the things that we did under this administration is went to places that we normally don't go, interact with countries from the Middle East, for example, emerging markets um, from Asia that normally New York doesn't interact with. And that brings an amazing perspective to the city, but it also allows us to export many of the great things that we do here. And those bilaterals turn into multilaterals very quickly. So Ukraine, as an example, country going through war, but um, if they're not engaging in New York in some way, they're missing out on one of the largest financial markets in the world. So we try to work, depending on the region, by thinking, okay, how do we exchange what we're doing well here with that region? So, for example, um, parts of Asia that we've signed agreements with, MOUs that I think there were more under this administration than I think any other administration. Vietnam and New York City signed an agreement on exchanging technology, and that just speaks so well to how New York City now is the #2 tech hub in the world. But look at what's happening in Vietnam. Same thing that we've done with places like Israel, for example. 75% of Israeli startups were going to the West Coast only 7 years ago. Today, 75% are coming to New York. Again, that speaks to where New York City is heading, but also where we can connect with these countries and in many cases, cities. And to your question with Ukraine, Ukraine has some of the best engineering minds in that region. And in many ways, Ukraine has been the back office for many tech companies in and around the world. So before the war, that was the case. Let's think about where that can happen in Ukraine after the war, what we can do as a city, but also as a country to build out places that are not doing well. And that's the lens that we're always looking at. What can we do by connecting the pieces between governments like New York City and governments around the world, whether it's cities, states, or federal government, and do well for both sides economically, as well as just connecting people to people.
Whom do you work with in those countries, and how do you make this happen?
So we work with city governments, but we also work with federal governments. And again, the wonderful thing about being New York City, when we call, people pick up the phone, and that doesn't happen with too many cities around the world. So the ability to lead as a city like New York and reach out to parts of the world that are not connected in the way that they should be gives us the ability to lift up any city around the world just by connecting. And it's just amazing to watch how many cities around the world want to connect with New York City in order to lift up their profile. And we get that quite often. And it's just such a pleasure to be able to say, okay, let's help this city out, or let's help this country out by making that connection, because there's always something that we can find on the other side that will help us here as well. So it's never a one-way street. It's always a bridge that goes in both directions.
That's very interesting because so far we talked about going to the emerging markets, but you are talking about also emerging countries and governments from emerging markets coming here to do things. Yeah. Um, on that note, I want to bring Kaushik into the conversation here that you've done a lot of work with the World Bank. And a very naive stereotype I have of emerging markets is of thinking of them as a manufacturing hub or a demand hub, etc. And no, maybe no more than that. How should we be thinking of emerging markets and how do you view them?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do I need to put it on? It automatically comes on. Yeah. Thank you very much, Vishal. And before I go in, just also congratulations to EMI. The engagement with emerging economies and Cornell, my two big engagements, makes it very special for me. Thank you very much. This question is very relevant because my practical experience and entry into this world is in a very unusual way. In a country, in India, when I took leave from here and went as advisor to India. As you know, India is one of those strange countries that really never got into manufacturing. There are big questions being asked now. It went from agriculture to the services sector, to becoming a back office. And during my advisory role over there, it was my first engagement with the kinds of questions being raised and ratings. The question is, how do you evaluate a country like this? And I would very often feel, sitting in Delhi during the 3 years that I was on leave from Cornell and doing this, is that you get it wrong, these emerging economies. Because as you're saying, we put it into these categories of manufacturing and a couple of things. This used to hurt me. And when Standard & Poor's would come or Fitch would come, and also the World Bank's ease of doing business. It stopped now because of a controversy, but people will be familiar. That was a way that the World Bank would send teams to evaluate how easy is it to do business in different countries and rank them out. One of the things as an academic researcher would trouble me is looking at all the features of an economy, the fiscal deficit, monetary policy. I wouldn't be sure whether Vietnam is ahead of another country or not. Whereas these international organizations would come and then rank them easily. What are they doing right or wrong? And for me, the insight into this comes from what you referred to as the World Bank, from being a user of World Bank's rating of emerging economies, rating and ranking. When I joined the World Bank, what I did not know when I accepted that offer is that the rating unit would be under my charge. So earlier I used to be observing what they are doing, and suddenly this was under my charge. It's almost like you're eating in a restaurant and suddenly you're told that you now become in charge of the kitchen. There is taken there to handle that. That gave me a very important insight. Any of these outside evaluations, there's a self-fulfilling element. If you rate one country higher than another, investors and players begin to believe that you must have some teeth in sight. And therefore, the investors go in. And when many of them go in, there is, of course, positive externalities for their going in. So part of this is self-fulfilling. Subsequently, having come back, I have actually done some research with PhD students here to show that that is true. So yes, important question, very complicated question. And I will, if I get a chance, talk a little bit about relative ratings later on, but let me hold back.
Okay. Let me ask you one clarification question. So you said that ratings become self-fulfilling and itself becomes like a feedback mechanism dynamically over time.
Yeah.
So one can classify emerging markets in terms of industries or demand, manufacturing, etc. Is it all of the above, or should one be pigeonholing emerging markets or not?
You can, of course, classify it on this.
Yeah.
But there are remarkable exceptions. And really, India is an amazing exception, which I think is hurting India now. That for reasons which are to do with the complexity of the bureaucracy, the services sector, which was outside bureaucratic control, flourished in a way that the manufacturing sector could not, because the bureaucracy is extremely cumbersome. Whereas India is an exception. So sort of taking the range of emerging economies and putting them into these straight slots, we do miss out on something. And by some rules that you develop by this straitjacket, you get wrong on these predictions, is what I'm claiming.
Okay. Thank you. I want to switch a little bit to talk about the role of technology in emerging markets. And when people refer to emerging markets, they oftentimes say that technology is a really important component of wanting to go into emerging markets and make an impact. Kelly, I want to start with you on this one. How critical is technology development, and do you think it actually creates some opportunities for the future that one could not have thought of otherwise?
Certainly. And I think it's more apt to say what appropriate technology is. I really like, Claude, what are your three things? Design,
Invent,
invent,
make, and sell.
invent, make, sell. So that really resonated with me. You know, for us as a company, it's really important for us to improve access to care. That's what we go to the market. We say we're going to improve access to care, and especially for the 6 billion people who live in emerging markets, right? So in order to do that, we need to look at our technology and services stack. Is it appropriate for emerging markets? A tangible example of this is, I don't know how many people know how MRI machines work, but, oh, I see one, two. But you need a lot of helium around the magnet. And they have these chimney things that come out that if there's an emergency, there's a big red button they press and all the helium goes out, and it costs $200,000 every time that happens, right? So it's an element that's expensive to manage. It's almost impossible to get in some emerging markets. And let's say all of Africa has only a handful of MRIs, and we have that probably within a 2-mile radius of here, right? And so that is a limiting factor that the company has been considering. So we invested a lot of money in figuring out how do you make an MRI, which has been the same for a long time, without helium, right? So we did that successfully. And then we had to, we just finished a brand new manufacturing plant in Oxford in the UK to build these new magnets without helium. So that kind of opens up the world for us as far as, you know, as making these magnets that are appropriate technology for the emerging markets. But it's not, as you heard me say before, it's not just the technology, right? That capacity building is super important, and the technology and services and digital landscape around that technology. Like if you dropped that MRI in Tanzania, are there any MRI techs there? Probably not, right? So what are you going to do about it? So then we also built the technology like to do remote operations and remote coaching from, let's say, another country to be able to, I mean, we're fixing latency issues and stuff, and we figured that out at this point, to be able to operate that MRI remotely as well. And then while we do that, we can build the capacity in the region. So by combining the appropriate technology and services, we're improving access to care in those emerging markets and essentially improving healthcare worldwide and making our shareholders happy. But it's all about having that appropriate technology.
Yeah. Did others want to react to this with any examples?
Caught it.
Yeah.
So just one thought on this, again, coming from the lens of New York City, and just thinking about the fact that the city has the size of an economy as yet you have tiny countries around the world that have smart city technology that we are light years behind. And then in the other direction, how can we take the technology that we lead with, and how do we bring that technology to that country? So as an example, you know, just having gone and interacted with the Middle East on a regular basis, you go to the Emirates and you take out a phone, you can do anything with your government in the Emirates on your phone. In New York, you know, that you dial it down about 90%. Yet we have a police department that is probably on the same level as many national government, police departments, and in many ways military forces. And the technology that we have here is just so far beyond anything that any country has. I would say in many cases 80% of most countries. Whether it's our cyber command center at one police plaza. So the idea is, how do we take what others are doing well and bring it here? But also, how do we take what we're doing really well and bring it elsewhere? And Ukraine, as another example, what they're doing with dual-use technology today is, in many cases, light years ahead of what the United States is doing, which is also one of the reasons why we're learning so much from, unfortunately, the wars that are happening around the world, because so much is happening within such a short period of time that as a country, but also as a city, we learn from, whether it's cyber, whether it's the dual-use technology, and that's moving us very quickly forward in the same way that AI is moving the world forward very quickly. Unfortunately, many of these wars are moving us forward in not necessarily the places that we want to move forward in, but the technology that is growing from these unfortunate situations are being brought to the United States, and then in many cases, much of what we do here in New York City is exported out to places that would normally never be able to see that sort of technology. So to be able to see that happening through this little city of ours is just a very, very unique space. It's a petri dish.
Yeah, these are two different aspects of technology. Like Kalani was talking about robustness of technology to the environment that it's in, and that's what Claude was also describing earlier, like design for where you are. And what you're describing is that in many situations, an emerging country might be actually ahead in many ways. Like digital payments is a very good example, where there are lots of countries that are now ahead of where we are in the US. I want to switch to the last section of this discussion, and I want to ask you to try to make some predictions. I'll ask a few questions, and this is open to anyone. So strategic partnerships. What's the outlook for 10 years from now for strategic partnerships? Will there be more strategic partnerships, fewer? Which regions or what types of partnerships are more likely to be there?
So let me start with this one,
Yeah.
if I may. Partnerships will never go out of favor.
Mm-hmm.
And now, does that mean they will always trend upwards? Definitely not. Does that mean they will always be the same scope? Definitely not. But as long as there are two parties in the world which have similar objectives, but individually don't have either sufficient time or sufficient resources to achieve their goals, they're going to go out and look for partners. Mm-hmm. And so I'm happy to prognosticate and say that the partnerships will last forever, right? Now, 10 years from now, will they be 50% more than now or less? I can't say, but they will exist, and they will exist in a flavor that is relevant to the time.
Okay. One more, and then I'll ask another question.
I would say, like I was saying, healthcare doesn't work without partnerships, right? From the healthcare perspective, but who the partners will, like, who is partnering with who will change. And I can already see this already when I work with countries. Like I'll speak with an Asian country, and they might want to, in the past, send their physicians to the US, and now they're asking, can you start to connect us with Canada instead? Because we want to reduce our reliance. And then Canada also wants to reduce their reliance. So it's like different time for partnerships, I would say. Things that I haven't seen before are happening.
Okay, Kaushik, you want to get in?
Yes,
Yeah.
I wanted to slip in a comment here.
Yeah.
My own expectation is, given these long supply chains that are today visible all over the world, the hold-up problem is a new problem that you can suddenly threaten to cut it off, which is going to freeze the whole world's production. That being so, I feel the word strategic. I can speak loud enough. Would that do it? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. It's a sudden. I didn't want to give.
We need to start again.
I didn't want to give a jolt to this. I've got used to speaking loudly. Let me now adjust to that. So, given that these supply chains and the risk of a sudden cutoff, I feel the word strategic now becomes very important. The partnership is going to be also politically sensitive countries with which you can work together. You'll form partnerships so that there's an assurance, almost trust that we have at individual levels between countries, that you will not suddenly threaten to cut it off. So I feel strategic partnerships are going to get very important because there will be that trust element which allows trade in everyday life between countries. And the world is feeling a bit more nervous about where someone might use this as a hold up strength. And so I expect it to grow stronger, but in really strategic ways. That adjective becomes very important.
Yeah. This is very interesting in the context of what was said earlier, that for international investments, long-term outlook is really important. But is the outlook for long-term investments going down or up? I'll call on each one of you.
Right.
Claude, up or down?
I don't think it's going down. I think the partnership become more critical.
Yeah.
Instead of talking about technology, we'll like to talk about technologies. And each of us, we control something. In our case, my division is expert in glass for semiconductor industry. We sell to Zeiss in Germany. They sell to SML in Netherlands, who sells to TSMC in Taiwan. And then Taiwan received the photomask from Japan. So each of us around the globe, we have some know-how, we have some domain of expertise, and we depend on each other. So thinking that one company or one country can do it all, it's just a dream.
Okay, thank you. Ed, any last word?
Well, I look at it as realignment rather than outward and inward. There are lots of things that are happening because of what is happening currently, whether it's between the United States and many other countries around the world. And a lot of people are looking at it in the moment. If you take a step back and look at it 10, 20 years from now, we may be in a very, very different place only 3-4 years from now with a new administration that may realign us in a very different direction.
Yeah. With that, I want to thank my panel. I learned a lot from this discussion, and I hope you all did as well. And you feel as excited as I do about the opportunities in emerging markets that are coming up. And you, thank you all.